what are you looking most forward to from a personal perspective? Maybe from innovation, market, could be anything. What's your outlook and what are you looking for?
The thing I'm looking forward the most, I think there will be a lot more, at least that's my hope. Maybe it's a bit of a hope here actually, a lot more interoperability and composability. So I'm following those on-chain chats a lot, right? Particularly in like Terraforms, in Tart. There are some communities that are really, really big brains, let's say. Like those people are actually writing the new ERC standards essentially, or NFT in ERC standards. The way that the conversations are going there, it feels like there will be a lot of art experimentation first on those interoperability and composability side of it. And then I'm hoping that games will start adopt that as well.
Welcome back to the show, everybody. More than excited for this episode. I felt like this show had happened already. It was so weird as I was looking through guests. I came across Chainleft and I was like, have we talked before? Have we done this discussion? Turns out we hadn't. He's one of the beloved Namecoin community members, also one of our outspoken leaders for on-chain provenance, and also getting into the weeds of some of the we'll say some of the messy debates around historical NFTs, but somebody that a lot of people look up to. Recently, over the last 6 months to 8 months, he started his own project called Art Ponzi, which is really experimenting with everything on chain and what it even means to be on chain. There's some cool graphics that he's put out and Medium articles, or actually Mirror articles that he's put out as well that we'll uncover. But excited to learn a lot today. So Chainleft, thank you for spending your time with us today.
Hi, Jake. Great to be here. I mean, it's great to actually be on your podcast. I've listened to it a lot of times, of course, like with many people that I actually really admire. So yeah, it's a little bit like, well, I'm certainly, feeling very honored to be here, actually.
Hey, finally, the time has come. Yeah, we've talked countless times on Twitter Spaces. I prefer podcasts a little bit more. They're a little bit more intimate. You're not as persuaded as much by the crowd and the paparazzi sending emojis to kind of persuade the conversation. So we get to really explore the different things that we want to do. Tell us a little bit, just basic of how you got involved in crypto. I mean, your knowledge with on-chain and technical development is probably one of the most knowledgeable people that I know. So curious kind of like what that background is to what you can say without doxing yourself.
Yeah, sure. So originally I'm a data scientist, like my in real life work has been in data science. Although I would say maybe last few years I'm doing less code work and more maybe my work is, I'm in a tech company and I'm doing a bit more maybe approaching towards the sales side of things a little bit, I guess. Just because, as you get further in your career, you start to become, having more of those soft skills, I guess. But yeah, like with crypto, I think I got involved in 2017. So that was the earliest time that I got involved. Not NFTs per se. It was just, learning about the coins and stuff like that. And originally, I guess my political stance, I'm outspoken, right? So my political stance is a little bit different than most of the crypto community. And I think I got maybe more interested in it since in 2017 because of the fact that Ethereum enabled those things that are actually appealing more towards my worldview. I started to see, those DAO conversations. I started to see, the different use cases, smart contracts especially, right? Like, it enables so many things that can be actually useful for public good. So, yeah, that's when I really started to get involved in 2017. But of course, at the time, it was really purely exploration. It was very new for me. And I was really just, buying coins essentially, right? Not doing much. Didn't even set up, I think, a MetaMask wallet or anything like that at the time. And that also was the period that I kind of moved countries and so on. So I changed a lot of countries in my life. So in 2018 or so, I kind of it kind of fizzled down essentially, like it did with many people during the bear market, I guess. And in 2020. Yeah, it was 2020. I kind of got really interested in again because of the rise of DeFi, essentially, and understanding how that works. Obviously, an immediate challenge to traditional finance was kind of an appealing factor in there. And then, yeah, 2021, I would say the first half of 2021 is when I really started to get into NFT space. Yeah, I mean, it appealed immediately to me because I also had, so even though my major, in the university, I was focused more on data, statistics, and all those things. I did have some art. I guess in US terms, you could call it like minor, but of course, I haven't actually finished college in US, so it was more like I studied some art courses essentially back in university. So I had interest in art. I did some when I used to live in London. I did some even street art, like a very very basic a few stuff. I'm guessing you can still find it there. And then there were I did some photography in the past as well. So there was always some interest of art for me. But then, in 2021, when we see those NFTs, it became really clear, like the use case became really clear to me with the artists getting finally paid for their work, essentially, right? And as I started collecting some art as well, the use case for digital goods and ownable digital goods really became very like it was very obvious essentially at that point. And that is when actually, like almost immediately, like the first half of 2021, when I started getting into NFTs, is also when I immediately started getting into on-chain NFTs, because that also was very obvious to me that it was different and it was a unique aspect of NFTs that was different than what you could see in traditional art world, or when I say traditional, I'm not just referring to the physical paintings, but even the digital art. It's different than that, right? Like in digital art is always in some server or in your own laptop, while when you have an on-chain NFT or on-chain art, that actually can be stored forever. It's the one thing that is most likely to be stored, let's say, like most likely to be preserved. And that also became very clear in my head, like in very early on. So since then, essentially, I've been only researching the on-chain art and well, NFTs in general, of course.
Yeah, you put together this fantastic on-chain NFT timeline, which I'm going to speed ahead a little bit, because where we ended up meeting was a historical space, and this came out a little bit more like maybe 6 months into that. Why are on-chain NFTs so important? You mentioned it a little bit, like so important that you put together this on-chain NFTs timeline, which I don't doubt that this probably took days or weeks to put together. As someone who's put together many NFT timelines, this is something that takes a lot of digging. It takes a lot of reaching out, right? I'm assuming you probably had to reach out to some people like Nate Alex and maybe like Prankster, some of these people who try to dabble in it. Of course, it starts with puny codes, but just tell us a little bit about the process of even putting this together, and what's it composed of for those that are just listening, and what are some things that you learned about the history of on-chain NFTs?
Yeah, it did take quite a few days. I would say maybe 2 weeks or so. Yeah, I did reach out to some people, but also in some cases I didn't even have to reach out because I knew already a lot about this stuff. And one thing I should be clarifying here, this was I was very clear that this was V1, right? Like I knew that I would have to do a lot of updates on this. Because this timeline has, like, even when I look at it, some of the stuff I cringe a little bit, because I know that there can be things that can be corrected. Like I'm a bit of a perfectionist, so like I know some things that are in this timeline that can be improved. Like there are some projects that should be here, for example, that aren't here. And I was very clear in my thread as well that just write me if I did anything wrong, and people were very kind. And
dude, people chastise you. As a timeline, I always put V1 now in front of it. You just know that that people are going to get angry about it, but you just kind of have to be aware that it's criticism because they're passionate about these projects, or maybe their bags are really packed, but you just got to be prepared for it.
It's funny, like I think it was Leo. So I've spoken to a lot of people, but Leo said to me that, I said, like, I'm a bit like afraid, like people might not, like resonate with it, or like they might get, angry or anything like that. He said, like the best way to learn something in Twitter is just post something wrong and then people will correct you. So that's actually, if there's anything wrong here, like, and people did actually, and I would say like 90%, because I was so obviously, like, I really requested that from people to comment on it. People, I would say 90% were like nice about it, let's say, like when they're correcting. So it was good. I did learn a lot, by the way, like from other people when they added their detail as well. But I would say this timeline is still 90% correct. It's like there's, well, maybe more, 95% correct. There are a lot of research that went into it, of course, and different chains as well, right? I had to reach out to different people for different chains. Nate, I don't know if I think I probably asked Nate as well. I mean, he's done a lot of cool stuff. Nate Alex, like chain faces and squiggly that is in this timeline. So yeah, that was really fun. I think the reason I put it together was, I mean, it's obviously my interest anyway since 2021. It's been almost 2 years now that I've been into this specifically on-chain NFT sort of world, and yeah, it was an obvious interest, but also I wanted to, because I've been focusing a lot also on more recent experiments as well, not just historical ones. As you know, you and I, we have been in historical NFT space for long, and we focus on these like pre 2020, 2019, 2018, pre ERC 721 collections a lot. But those collections of course are very important, and because they have done a lot of important things at very early stages. But I also wanted to give a shout and appreciate the newer projects that are actually doing something innovative and pushing the boundaries as well. After all, those stuff that you see in this 2021, 2022, they're also the type of collections that have done something first, right, or unique. So in my perspective, even if they might not be, in 2030 or 2040, maybe still 2017 or 2017 Etherux might be still more valuable. I don't know, but from a purely technological and purely like admiring an innovation kind of perspective, I would probably appreciate something that happened in 2021 that was super innovative as well, right? So that's kind of, I guess, the reason why I wanted to put that together.
It makes complete sense. So as we dissect this, at the bottom, there's a few notes. First, there's Namecoin, Bitcoin, Ethereum. So those are the 3 blockchains mentioned. And then some asterisks says only ownable assets are considered. Art, PFP definitions and significance are subjective. Yes, very. 100% on-chain means the media file stored on-chain instead of just the code. In-chain generation, the file is generated by the blockchain. Tell us a little bit of the difference between on-chain and in-chain, and even, for example, recently Moonbirds, which is a popular PFP project, mentioned in-chain. They kind of got chastised for not maybe properly using the word right. Just tell us a little bit, take us through what the differences are.
So the on-chain and in-chain difference itself is a very good question. We've been debating it even until like last week with, so I have a Discord called Pushers, like that is kind of for boundary pushers. And there is a channel specific to on-chain, and we talk about this in-chain, on-chain difference quite there a lot. And I think there's still confusion even within the on-chain NFT community. So it's okay to, I think, for people to understand it or get confused by this. My, I guess, like conclusion after all these conversations was that I think in-chain can be in-chain generation. So when the artwork is produced by the Solidity, essentially, like through EVM. So when you're minting it, essentially you're creating it, or the functions within the contract itself create the artwork, instead of like the opposite side of that spectrum is that you create some tokens and then you upload the artwork later on. So that second version is not something that is in-chain generated. So for example, Art Ponzi is on-chain, but it's not in-chain generated because I upload the artwork later on through the contract myself, like through the functions, not during the generation of the contract or deployment of the contract or generation of the token itself. So that's the difference. It's a little bit of a novelty difference, to be clear. It's not a difference of permanence, because after all, an on-chain file is on-chain file. It's always, on the chain. It's permanent still. But it is cool that, when someone creates the artwork through Solidity, because Solidity is not meant for that. And when it's done that way, it's kind of, artistically interesting, let's say. But then there is a separate side of it. Then there is what Moonbirds have used. And that's also the reason that they use it that way is not necessarily wrong, because the first person actually who used the term in-chain generation was a Moonbird developer who did the broad chain back in 2021, I believe, or 2020, I'm not sure. And the way that they did it was through, again, generating within the Solidity or through the contract, but they've created a file format called BMP. BMP is it's essentially, you can actually go into the this will be a bit difficult to explain, but the rendering is done inside the contract, not just the generation. And by rendering, they're referring to the fact that you can actually see the image almost within the format. If you kind of trace yourself through the different aspects, like you can actually call the token URI, and you can trace the different pixels, and you can actually put it on the screen. While with SVGs or HTML, which are the most common ways to put things on chain, for those, they're more like instructions, because you need a browser essentially to display them. Do you understand the difference? So BMP format is the uniqueness in what Moonbirds did, or what Broadchain did, essentially what they call in-chain rendering.
Yeah, they definitely kind of pulled one out of the Mooncats book with doing some kind of on-chain, in-chain accessories as well, which is quite unique. So looking at this and overviewing, we'll dive into Namecoin here probably afterwards. Where do you see maybe a breakout moment for on-chain experimentation, or something unique along this chart that really propelled on-chain NFTs forward?
Well, I think probably autoglyphs, a very obvious one, I think, because that one is like the first that was really 100% done on chain. The previous experiments were more towards, like, for example, there are cases when there was on-chain stuff that was done, right? Like, so for example, Mooncats, I know you're a big fan, they had the metadata on chain, and that itself is important, and that's why I wanted to appreciate that in that chart, because even though the art wasn't on chain, and to be clear, Mooncats, as you know, is now on chain as well, but the art wasn't on chain in 2017, but metadata still was, and that's still very important, because especially in collections where rarity is important, or where you want to focus on, like, for example, PFP collections as well, right? In those collections, having metadata completely on chain ensures that there won't be any rug risk, for example, for in the future, right? So that itself is very important already. So that also already kind of creates this metaverse quality, because you can always re-render that artwork through even different styling, right? You can actually create a 3D Moonbird using the same traits that you have already on chain in 2017. So that's a really cool, I guess, advancement already. So there are lots of those advancements happening. Like, obviously, there's Olga, right? Like on chain image directly that happened in Counterparty. But I would say, like, the breakout moment, because since you asked, I would say is probably autoglyphs. I think that's one, of course, and the B is, I think, art blocks. Like, art blocks really advanced that. To be clear, art blocks is not 100% on chain. So art blocks did a little bit differently. They put the code on chain usually, and not the actual artwork. And the code sometimes even has some off-chain libraries. So in those cases, it becomes a little even less permanent. But it still popularized the process of doing art on chain. So that was, I think, one of the biggest advancements.
Yeah, it is quite interesting when you look at on the progression of on-chain NFTs, and then also just intertwining it with historical NFTs. You see these trends kind of emerge, they fade out, and then they come back, and then eventually there's like this breakout moment of some sort of project that kind of like sets the lights off for everybody. And it's like, holy crap, like this is something we should be paying attention to. Obviously, autoglyphs with art. And when you look at these two, it's very similar to the historical space. When you're looking at the predecessor, it's not as considerable as the successor, because, right, the technology advances. And so when you kind of look at things retroactively, things kind of get mislabeled or they get forgotten. But for example, with Mooncats, at the time that was the most on-chain something had been. Of course, there was limiting technologies, but it's tough to kind of discount that kind of stuff. And these are like these philosophical debates that seemingly will probably never end, right? Especially once you try to start valuing some of these like prehistoric or digital artifacts of how innovative were they? Did they change the space? Why did they fade out? Right? If they were so significant, they should have existed for longer. The community would have stuck around. Like all of these different debates. But as I look at this, there's something that like painstakingly kind of sticks out is that the majority of this pertains to art, and then kind of towards 2021, maybe towards 2018, you start seeing like a little bit of music, a little bit of experimentation with gaming. Is there any other use case for on-chain NFTs that you see emerging, or is there anything that anybody is missing that can use on-chain storage as something within their project or some sort of like classification of NFTs that you see will dominate the on-chain NFT space?
Oh yeah, that's a good question. I think actually, like, yes, most of this has been focused on art, and actually I think that makes sense because art usually kind of starts things, right? Like you can know that like artists are usually a little bit those like boundary pushers, innovators. They kind of do the things that they're not supposed to do, and then you start seeing it getting adopted in different ways as well. Even in the cities, like where the artists live are usually the areas that start to increase in price over time, and then artists move somewhere else, and then the more richer people kind of move in there because they basically popularized that location. I think there is a very strong use case for on-chain games as well. Particularly the aspect that I talked about, like the on-chain mechanics, right? So I think in this chart, you see the Ether Orcs as the 100% on-chain game. I think Wolf, that game is 100% on-chain as well. And they've seen a lot of success as well. And I think the interesting thing about on-chain games is that especially the metadata being on-chain is very important. And this is, again, what we kind of mentioned about Mooncast and why I think that is a big innovation for that time. Having the metadata on-chain means that even if you render the artwork somewhere else, like in a centralized server or whatever, let's say the company goes down, and this is the main use case for NFTs, right? Like, or gaming NFTs in general, right? Like, even if a company goes down, you still have the asset and you can actually carry over to another, like interoperability within the metaverse, games essentially. And that having the metadata on chain would allow that. It will allow this composability aspect between different games. So that in itself is, I would say, probably is the number one most important thing for a game to have. Like, even if you're developing a game today that is going to be completely rendered and done, everything is off-chain, everything is centralized, just have at least the metadata on-chain. That's going to be very cheap, by the way. Like, you will have 10, 15 traits that is going to be stored on-chain. It's going to be super cheap. That is super important because having that will allow the other developers use the data from the contract or from the like on the chain. They will literally look at that and develop whatever they want to build next on top of that data. So that's, I think, the most important part of having an on-chain game. Then, of course, if artwork is on-chain, that's just the extra benefit. I think that usually still appeals more towards the collectability side of it. I can see like, some people being interested in that, really, like that. Oh, this chain is like, the art is also on-chain as well, and that's going to be like very useful also. I think there was recently a Bankless article actually about on-chain games, specifically like how it has promises and how it creates this permissionless layer. So, in traditional games, you have the base logic of the game that lives on, on the centralized server, or like that is controlled by the game developers. And then you have the social rules, right? Like the Discord and social media in general, basically, where they communicate. While with fully on-chain games, what you can have, and I'm a bit maybe talking about a bit more distant future, where we have even on-chain, not just on-chain rules or mechanics, but also the even the communication layer being on-chain, like the social media and stuff like that. That will become like very, I would say, very strong premise for, I think, blockchain gaming overall. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. Speaking of just on-chain, that's kind of seeing a revitalization right now through something called ordinals, which I know both of us had talked about, I think it was like towards the end of the summer in 2022 when we had first talked with Casey. It seems that there's a bunch of people kind of bringing new attention to it. What are your thoughts on it? Do you think that this is something that will be substantial for just Bitcoin in general, right? You got all these noobs and these kind of ETH degens now running full Bitcoin nodes to try to store their things in types of individual sats. Do you think then this will lead to some sort of innovation on Bitcoin? What are your thoughts on it?
Oh, I mean, I love ordinals and inscriptions. For me, like Casey Rothermore, he already joked about it in, I think, so yes, you and I talked to him, I think in July or so. And I remember him joking about it in August or September that this will be Bitcoin developers' Trojan horse for Ethereum community to run Bitcoin Core, and it's actually happening. Like it's really awesome to see that. Like he actually advanced, literally, like advanced the premise of like the decentralization for Bitcoin itself using this method. I know a lot of maximalists or financial usage maximalists or Bitcoin is money kind of, I guess these guys being pissed about ordinals and inscriptions, but I think there is like zero. I don't understand it. For me, you mentioned it before as well, right? Technology advances over time. Like to me, this is an advancement. Like there is no downside to it, in my opinion. I can see people getting pissed. Oh, they're using the Taproot upgrades discount for something that is not meant for the discount, actually, because it's garbage. You're storing speculation in our precious Bitcoin network and so on. But I think in the end, yeah, this is like in July when I posted what you're sharing right
July 21st, 2022. So yeah, about 8 months ago.
Yeah, that was quite early on. My main, like, I was fascinated by this already at that point, like in July, and my main interest was regarding an article that I was writing about the how do we define NFTs in historical NFT space, especially, or from historical perspective. And at the time, XC Pinata, Pinata, the XC Pinata, who has been an artist on the Counterpart in the past, he actually mentioned Casey to me, like that. Oh, this guy is doing some sort of like early tracking of Satoshis on Bitcoin. And I contacted Casey. We talked quite a bit, and then I even like asked him to proofread what I've written about ordinals in July. And my main interest at the time was that the ability to track the provenance of early Satoshis, right? So no artwork, no inscriptions, just pure ordinal theory itself. And the reason I was also fascinated was that it introduced this new provenance technique almost, right? It's using this this method of, I kind of find it quite elegant because it doesn't force anyone to subscribe to this theory, but it says that if you follow this approach, you can actually kind of assume that this sat is the first sat essentially, and this sat is the next one, and so on. So that ordering technique is pretty, I think, interesting, and I can already see historical NFT collectors being interested in those early Satoshis. Like even today, like I don't know anyone who actually bought any of those early sats, like in an actual transaction, but it will come. Like I'm already, like, this is the alpha I'm giving now, I guess, like that it will come, like that people will be interested in those early stats, and they will it's interesting. And then Casey also continued more his work more essentially, and then he started doing inscriptions over those ordinals essentially. He used Taproot Taproot transactions for that, and I think it was pretty cool as well that he's done that. People are now, I think, mostly degening because they're basically focused on the these will be the early inscriptions, they will be valuable in the future. Again, similar to our historical NFT thesis, that's this is if something is first, it's supposed to be probably valuable. So yeah, that's how the inscriptions kind of blew up. I think that probably the current hype will fizzle down a little bit in the coming weeks and months. But I also see a long-term like usage of ordinals from a collector's point of view as well. It's a really beautifully designed, right? Like he's done it. He's ensured that everything is on chain. It's also like, you know, on Bitcoin it's permissionless. Someone can build their own protocol, but the ordinal protocol itself has been done pretty well, essentially, and it kind of advances the on-chain storage. It advances the Bitcoin's usage. Bitcoin's blocks are now fuller than before, which, and you know, increases the subsidy for mining, which actually is great for Bitcoin, because we know that they're gonna have, you know, Bitcoin might have problems in the future after the halvenings. So yeah, I just have positive things to say about this.
That's kind of how I feel too. I mean, even Joe Looney, who created Rare Pepe's, already has created something new to where on Counterparty, instead of using IPFS, you can now inscribe the data on Bitcoin and then use that as the data storage as an alternative. It's quite unique. So I think it's really like this kind of idea could really like revolutionize Counterparty in a way where people aren't just trading sats. You have the data linked to the XCP token. So it can be very complementary for some of the things that are happening. I did post, I think it was last night, actually, at the time of this recording. I said, where is it at? Oh, early ordinal collectors is one step away from early sats collectors, which is one step away from early digital asset collectors, which is one step away from historical NFTs, right? All kind of funnels back to everything. At least that's kind of what we hope. I do suspect something very similar to what you were saying was, once this hype does fade, right? Because right now they're just tracking like the early use of ordinal. So there will probably be, I don't know, maybe one or two collections within that first 10K that, you know, will end up being culturally significant. But once I think the infrastructure is improved and they're able to start tracking some of the earliest sats, I think the ones that are owned by Hal Finney or those that were in the first block where Satoshi transferred Bitcoin to Hal, I think will probably end up being worth or being quite valuable. And I think that'll kind of shift that whole narrative to people just having this like massive barrage for some of the earliest sats, because that is quite iconic. But to me, I think, at least maybe this is me just having or taking in a little bit of hopium, is that it'll lead everything back to Namecoin, right? If they start going back to, hey, what are the earliest sats? Then it's like, oh, hey, what are the earliest NFTs, or what are the earliest experimentations? Because here, it's kind of helping or assisting this idea of like, not everything's an NFT, but there are things that can be collected that aren't in the definition of, you know, the ERC 721 standard. And you've written about this many, many times, about this idea of like on-chain provenance, or the difference between blockchain collectibles and some of just the earliest provenance debates. So first, I guess the first question would be, do you think this can lead back to Namecoin and some of the early blockchain collectibles? And then second, in your definition, what's this idea of like on-chain provenance? And we'll dive a little bit into the debate afterwards.
Yeah, I think it might. We actually were speaking with Punisher, as you know, another I guess big name now in the historical NFT community. He's done he's pushed a lot of good content as well, and he's also collected some really significant NFTs. One being the first 100% on-chain file, by the way. So we've been talking with him yesterday. Actually, he was saying the same. Like, you know, if people are willing to go and run their Bitcoin core to degen, like literally on these inscriptions, I just kind of find it hard to believe that they wouldn't just start an Electrum node. They would just run an Electrum wallet, essentially, much easier than Bitcoin Core, because, you know, Bitcoin Core needs to sync, and just start collecting these early NFTs, essentially, right? Like the first actual, you know, first NFTs are on Namecoin. So why wouldn't they do that? Yeah, I agree. I think it can lead to that. But at the same time, this current, I guess, hype around ordinals or inscriptions, I wouldn't call them the core, maybe target audience for ordinals in the long term. or inscriptions in long term. And similarly, I wouldn't call them the long term collectors for Namecoin assets either. I think the current hype is a little bit more around degening, really, like you said. So I think. So for them, I don't know if Namecoin will ever be valuable. I don't know. I don't know if Namecoin will ever have this like crazy hype of doing stuff on Namecoin itself. Maybe it will, maybe it will not. But in any case, I'm more interested in the part where people actually collect things for the long term, and they because really appreciate the early experiments and the early early stuff that was done. This kind of also brings us to what you said earlier. Like the technology has evolved over time, and like you have now these really interesting things these days, like in 2023. But then why didn't they become popular in 2015, 2006, 17? People kind of start asking those questions. I find that a little bit odd because for me, like Namecoin, or any really early NFT, they just use their technology of the time, and they were very innovative for me, at least for that time, and that's what I really appreciate and admire. So if I want something really sophisticated, yes, I'll go something in 2023 and look at an on-chain art that evolves within the chain and has on-chain mechanics and does cool stuff. But it's going to be different for when you're looking for historical NFTs.
Yeah. Namecoin's always been fun. There really hasn't been too much of a flippers market or even a resale market, which I think the majority of people who go into that are pretty aware of what they're getting themselves into, especially as something that began as an OTC market, which is now sold through Emblem Vault, which still has its own hurdles, right? You have the expiration. So you really have to do some due diligence to get into this. And if you don't, then you're probably going to get wrecked, which tends to be the case for those entering the historical space who have no idea what they're getting themselves into, which, could end up being some of these inscribers. It's such an early idea that you don't really know. It's just, it's trying to find like a needle in a haystack. So then as we explore Namecoin, you've wrote about this extensively. What do you find so captivating about it, the provenance of it, and I'm sure maybe even gain some inspiration for some of your other products? Like, for example, Puny Codes. I think that was the community that at least I found you, and then we became connected through. Tell us a little bit about what Puny Codes is and what kind of innovation that brought to just blockchain in general.
Yeah. So let me say in advance, right? I think Namecoin is still today is super fascinating. There are a lot of cool experiments on Namecoin, and with the provenance debate, I'm actually like even more confident than I was maybe in the summer, I would say. After like researching all these different provenance methods on like even today, like just seeing the ordinal theory bringing a completely new provenance method of tracking assets, essentially seeing that makes me even more sure that like someone can't dictate another chain's provenance methods on to a separate chain. So you can't say like to counterparty that, oh no, your provenance should be based on smart contracts. Like you can't do that because counterparty is not a platform where you build smart contracts and ship them and so on. And similarly, I find it quite weird that someone would try to impose this UTXO tracking method on Namecoin, and then that Namecoin assets shouldn't use the Namecoin's own provenance tracking, which is the name tracking essentially. So in that sense, I find I'm quite confident that I think Namecoin has its provenance, and I'm pretty sure about this. And back to your question, like Pinnacodes. Yeah, Pinnacodes is one of the most interesting, I guess, collections, in my opinion, in Namecoin and in overall historical NFT space. I've got involved with it early on. I think that was basically Pinnacodes was discovered in January 15, I believe, in 2022 by Poodle and Devoted. These two guys have been digging into Namecoin for a while after the popularity of eggs and blockheads and so on that came out earlier in 2021. And what they found was like they started seeing these patterns in some of the names that were registered on Namecoin with XN -- right? So when they started seeing this, they were a bit like, oh, what's happening here? Like, why is there such a pattern? Maybe you can find Devoted's original tweet actually here, like to the display. So this is Pinnacle's own account that you're seeing here. We were featured in a gallery, but you should find, I think, Devoted's. Yeah. So this is his pinned tweet, I think.
Yep, January 16th, 2022. So a little over a year ago.
Yeah. So yeah, what happened was, I think, quite fascinating, and people still don't appreciate this enough, I think. Devoted and Poodle essentially, they grabbed like a total of, I would say, much less than some other people who grabbed later on. Let's say they grabbed like 2-3% of the supply or something, and then they basically decided to share this. I was in touch with Devoted at the time for another project, like a completely non-profit project that I was working on. Like I was trying to build a website called NFT Archive, where we track the firsts of every category and so on. And within that, like, he was helping me with understanding Namecoin and Counterparty a bit more, because I was heavily in Ethereum at the time. And he mentioned, like, when he posted this, I saw it and I just contacted him, and he said, oh, like, this is how you set up the Electrum wallet. He actually explains in his thread as well. And he even sent me some NMC, like, just out of the blue. He just sent me some NMC. He actually did it to many people. He literally, from his own pocket, he sent people NMC so that they can claim these names for free, essentially. And then, yeah, I got like 10 at the time. And then I found many more, by the way. I just didn't want to register because I felt like, okay, these guys are sharing it for free for everyone. And like, other people, probably they have a reason, right? They wanted to have a good distribution. So I thought, okay, like, I shouldn't do more than that because other people will want to get some as well. And then that's what happened, actually. In the end, this is, I think, why Pinnacles blew up at the time very, like, strongly, because the community became pretty big in early on. And the reason I find them very interesting is that this XN -- pattern that they found at the time, they first didn't know what it was, but then when they researched it, they found out that this was actually an encoding language called Pinnacode, which enables you to store non-Latin characters or non-ASCII, you could call it, in a format that you can store on Namecoin, because Namecoin is normally designed as a DNS, right? So it's subscribes to the DNS limitations, so you can't like put an emoji.com, or I mean, currently you can because they use also Pinnacode, but actually you won't be able to. And then similarly, like at the time in 2011 especially, because of those limitations, people started to experiment and they started to think, okay, let's try this Pinnacode encoding language to store some ASCII art on blockchain, or some emojis on blockchain, some symbols on blockchain. And that's what really fascinates me, because it's probably the first instance of any sort of ownable creative expression that is on blockchain, right? I mean, there are creative expressions, like even in the Genesis block of Bitcoin, there is the, the newspaper headline that Satoshi himself put. So that's the creative expression, in my opinion, but it's not an ownable thing, right? But these assets are actually ownable. Like, these are actually NFTs. This is why I find Pinnacles super fascinating, because they're actually the first visual expressions that we see on the chain. And that's why I've been fascinated with it ever since. And I still have 10 Pinnacles, basically the same number that I had in the early days.
I actually find, so one of like the main debates for and against it, one of the against ones outside of the UTXO debate is that it's an unintentional collection, meaning that at the collections used today, there's a creator. He intended to create this 10K collection of generative art with all these traits, yada, yada, yada. Whereas the things on Namecoin, it's those looking through the chain, finding similarities between a lot of these different assets, and then grouping it together, finding that, that common denominator, and then classifying it as puny codes or Twitter eggs or blockheads or whatever the faith is. I actually find that more valuable, of the idea that there's, in this case, right, there was, I know Halusophile made 900 of the 3,000 or about, but you're saying, a group of maybe hundreds of people independently came to the same idea to take this puny code and put it on chain. And then somebody later, 10 years later, comes along and finds this grouping of 3,000 to put them together. To me, that's more valuable, because it means that there's a lot of those in the space who are trying to experiment, and they all came to the same conclusion of experimenting through this method, which means that at the time that was probably the most prevalent method to express on a blockchain, which to me becomes more valuable. Of course, it has its own rarities inside between years and emojis and different things like that. But that's to me what I find most fascinating. Whether it's actually art or not, you know, to me, I'm more on this side of like pretty much anything can be art. I think this conversation is art. I think building a business is art. There's a lot of things that can be expressed as art. I try to be a little bit more liberal with that point of thought, especially as dabbling in the historical space where being a little bit more closed off. Yeah, everyone's entitled to collect their own thing. I think anyone should collect anything. But I think you really miss out on a lot of the cool things and experimentation that's happening. The difference here, though, is that everything has a value. So everyone's kind of financially incentivized to either be a skeptic or an enthusiast, as you mentioned in this article that I'm browsing over.
Yeah, and I fully agree with you, by the way. I do find, I guess, like having a core team and, you know, having a more, I guess, centralized team, even like core developer and so on, that is still, it has benefits, obviously, if it's about pushing something forward. Like if you're trying to push a project forward and making decisions every day and so on, that does make sense. And I agree with that it's probably important. But if we're talking about a historical collection where it's all about just collecting, right? Like the whole point of if the whole point of collecting something is collectability, but not, you know, holding for some utility purposes, then I do think, yeah, I agree that a decentralized collection is more important or more valuable, at least for me. And I understand others might feel differently, but for me, it is very valuable, you know, to have that. You know, the way that we've done with Pinnacles was essentially a fully decentralized project, like approach. Like what we've done is we literally said, oh, where should be the cutoff? Oh, people kind of gave ideas. People said like, oh, ERC 721 maybe should be the cutoff. Some people said, oh, maybe it's easier if we just cut it on 2017. We voted. That's how the curation happened, essentially. It was very decentralized approach. And to this day, it's still every decision is being made in a decentralized way within the DAO. So I don't know. I mean, yes, it's not an intentional collection, and I agree with it. But at the same time, like you said, there is a kind of an interesting side, like narrative or story of it, right? To have this decentralized approach fully. So yeah, I like it for those reasons. And to be clear, some of the Pinning codes are probably like I would say probably less than half, but still probably done for directly speculative reasons as well. Just like today, like you have beautiful inscriptions and new stuff happening on ordinals, but then you also have just some whatever image that they could find, put it there just because it's going to be the first 10,000 inscription or something. So, and the same way, I think there are those ones in Pinning codes as well, but there are also really cool ones also. So I think like it's all about, you know, the rarity, I guess, as you said.
Yeah, the community rarity system really throws people off, and that's kind of what dominates the historical space. But as we've gone through this conversation, kind of leading up to your project, which is quite unique and innovative, called Art Ponzi, which the contract was deployed August 2022, 55 items in total, 10 unique items. All of these are on chain. If you get a chance and you're just listening to it, go to Art Ponzi on OpenSea and just look at the artwork. You can kind of see it has this influence of glitch art, which XCopy's kind of pioneered, but I know all of these, or at least most of these, have something unique to how it was created. Also, all fully stored on chain. Take us through the early stages of this development of the idea of Art Ponzi. I know you'd been thinking of it for some time before you actually deployed it. Tell us the relevance of it and kind of the early stages.
Yeah, so I actually have done. So I've been studying like Solidity and SVG already in 2021. And then I was actually thinking of doing a Gen Art project in 2022, but, you know, I have a real life job and I also have a, you know, family. And also I wasn't sure if I should be doing something that is, and I mentioned it, I think, yeah, in this very article that you have here, I wasn't sure that I should, you know, Gen Art is like you release at least like 1,000 pieces or 500 pieces or something, which kind of is already a good enough number that you will have probably a good number of collectors, that I would feel probably some sort of responsibility to, I think. I just didn't want to feel that essentially. And I wanted to do something really small and start really small. We're in the bear market. It's perfect time to do something really small and grow very slowly, right? That was my always approach. I never want to do something super fast. I want to do everything like perfect and slowly, essentially build over time. I don't also subscribe to these like move fast, break things kind of stuff, because sometimes you break other people's financial, financial, like their wallets essentially, right? So I don't want to do that. So that's why I started doing it very slow. And since I'm interested in specifically, on chain art, and since I've been learning about SVG already for a while, I thought like, okay, this is the best way to start it. I've also seen some mechanics that were done a lot in one-of-one NFT world, right? So those most glitch artists, I've been into glitch art for a long time as well, and most glitch artists, they are one of those first that actually started experimenting with different drop mechanics. For example, what they've done was they would introduce a token, right? Like, this is my ERC1155 airdrop token. One very significant one is, for example, Yak or Jack. I don't know how to pronounce, but Jack's art bot that you see here. That's a beautiful art piece itself. But it also, he airdrops essentially every month a beautiful glitch art piece essentially to the holders of this token. It's one of the first who's done that. I think like he started in early 22 maybe, and then as Manifold especially started growing, the other artists started to experiment with that as well. But what I thought was, okay, I can do something like that, but maybe I can do even less promise, right? Because this one assumes that you will buy like there will be 50 tokens, and then I will definitely airdrop something to you. But if I do something very small, just one, then it will be if I gradually increase it, it will become even less promise. So it will be even less speculative. That was the thinking that I had, and that's how I started essentially with Genesis Left. Genesis Left is probably so I might be wrong, but Genesis Left is probably the first 100% on-chain glitch, maybe maybe glitch art, maybe, I don't know. If you like gen art, if you count gen art, like for example terraforms, it's if you count this as glitch art, that is much before than this, of course. But this one had a big bidding war, this Genesis Left, and it went in the end for 1 ETH. That was my first piece, and I was very happy with the reception I had. A lot of people wrote to me about this piece that it really resonated with them. It's also depicting my wife, who was pregnant at the time and then just gave birth basically to my daughter. So it was a very special. It's to this day still the most special piece for me, of course. And actually, funny thing, a DAO was formed around this piece, who actually now owns this piece. Wow. A CC0 leftist DAO, I think is the name. Essentially, they bought this from the buyer of this piece for the same price, because the buyer was also into getting into this DAO, I think, and that's how it happened. It was pretty cool.
That is quite beautiful. Pulling a page out of JP Jansen's book with kind of like the love tribute as your first token. For those that don't know, he was on that. Created the first one of one NFT on Counterparty, and I'll just leave the definition as that, so we don't spark any further debates. What's here in this, as I'm scrolling through this article, you're using what type of software are you using to create this kind of stuff? Because then you're also showing literally just like a command center of code. How long does it take to put something like this together?
A lot. A lot of people won't realize this in my art, but like I would say 80% of my work is optimization and not the actual drawing. So I would say 20% happens on Inkscape. As you can see, this is the screen. What you're seeing right now is Inkscape. I draw there, and then what I do is I start removing nodes and ensuring that aesthetic is maintained. What I mean by removing nodes is that in SVG you have these pathways, right? So all these lines that you see are actual pathways, and those pathways are filled with certain colors, and they have some nodes that you can see in the corners, right? Those squares, and then they have also like how you extend them are forming the distance that they go to. So these are actually all scalable vector graphics, like so vector-based design essentially. And the more of those nodes you have, the more space it will take in the actual SVG code that you see now. And the longer you have that, of course, it means that the bigger file size you will have. And the bigger file size, the more expensive it will be to store on Ethereum. So this is why the step of removing the nodes, combining the elements under some grouping, or making sure that you don't even those decimal removal that you've seen in this previous command line, even that decimal removing was part of the optimization, because the shorter the code that I have, the better it will be, like, for me to be able to store on chain. So the Genesis left, I think, was, at the time, gas was like 5 gray or something. It was super low. So it cost me only like $20-$30 to store on the chain. As we, approached closer to this year, like this was, by the way, the most optimized piece, this clip left. I can talk hours about this piece. Like this whole entire thing is 1.9 kilobytes. Like, it's a glitch art. Like, you have those colors and aesthetics and distortions, lots of effects going on, but it's only 1.9 kilobytes. So it's actually like pretty optimized, let's say, heavily optimized. Anyway, but by the end of it, like when I did, for example, Keepers, which is not Keepers, and Left, which is the last piece of the season 1. I think it cost me $130 to store that last piece on the chain, because the gas has increased, and also the piece is a little bit more complex than the Genesis left piece. So it's, it cost a little more.
There's so much detail when you zoom into this. You can see the different colors blending on and left of this gentleman who's kind of kneeled down. It looks like he's like looking into the future looking into something, and you kind of see, I don't know if it's his thoughts or his eyesight, just the blending. It's quite unique. When you look at this, you just think glitch art, because that's kind of one of the crypto native art forms that the X copy pioneered. What, outside of like the on-chain aspect of your art, how would you classify this? Is it just purely glitch art, or is there some genres that you're blending together that maybe I'm missing looking at it?
I would say I use figures a lot and symbols a lot, like in my work. I only did one abstract work, for example. Like, I didn't do much. Even though I like abstract art a lot as well, I've done a lot less in Art Ponzi, simply because, and I wrote this in one thread as well, Art Ponzi was not just about, having this unique drop mechanics and so on, but it's almost like a resume, right? I wanted to do something unique in every piece, essentially. So every piece has this, like, a new element that I wanted to introduce and almost say that, oh, I can do this. So, by the way, I think maybe like the rendering is a bit slowed down on your computer. So, it's a lot of heavy stuff happening. So maybe, you will see it probably a bit better if when you close other tabs and stuff. But yeah, so, like, for example, one piece called what was the name of it? Finders Left. Finders Left has a hidden puzzle inside it. It's an on-chain puzzle. When you actually zoom into this piece, and you probably won't, I don't know if you can see, but in the bottom right corner, you can kind of little bit see some of the really, really small writings, right? Like, do you see those texts? This is distributed alongside the entire safe that you see in this visual. So, like, on the top right, there is some text. On the bottom left, there is some text. But you can only see these texts really fully if you close all your tabs and all the programs on your laptop and zoom in, because SVG is infinitely scalable. And I'm using that basically, right? Like, so because I know SVG is fully scalable. So you zoom in, and then you will actually see some seed phrase. And when you read that seed phrase, it actually, like, if you use that to go into another, like, wallet where that seed phrase is used, it stored another piece that was given as a gift to the person who finds it first. That's why this was called Finders Left, and the Keepers Left is the piece that they kept, essentially.
Wow. Did somebody find it already?
Yeah. It was done by a a user called Token Fox. He's
Wow.
also a huge on-chain fan, so he loved on-chain puzzle. So yeah, there's a lot of those stuff happening. For example, Party Left, that's a piece that has both audio and visual animation stored on chain. You can actually play it, I think, with sound on. Yeah, I don't know if you hear it, but because probably you have now earphones, you don't see it.
No, I hear it.
I can hear it. Yeah, so this was like the thing that was difficult in this was not even like producing the music or the actual animation, but synchronizing them. Like that was a difficulty for me. Like I had to make sure that the MIDI file that I stored on chain as well as the SVG file that I stored on chain should be in sync so that the animation works correctly, right? The party kind of works correctly. That was kind of, every piece has this like little a few elements that I try to kind of introduce. Pusher's Left is the one that I love the most, probably in terms of the aesthetic and in terms of the innovation. That one. So now you see it this way because you've already seen this, but if you open this in a new tab, it will start differently.
Oh.
It will start like with a skeleton who's pushing the kind of wall, and there is no like artwork in the background. And then, yeah, there you go. Okay, so now like it starts this way, and then it starts getting cracks on the wall. I mean, I don't have to explain. I think it's better to view it.
Wow. That's beautiful.
And the interesting thing with this one is that it will never loop back to the original state. So it's again, like this is something unique to SVG. You can't do this with GIF, right? GIF will always return back to its original state, while this won't. And this is not just stored on chain, but it's like a story that has a beginning and an end that is stored on chain. So it's kind of almost like a mini movie that I would call it. So that's why, these are the kind of things that's why I call it Art Pons is like my resume, right? These are the stuff that I can do. And now I'm actually working on stuff that are a bit more maybe displaying the things that I've already done, but in a more scalable way, I guess. Like I'm going to do it essentially on generative art, on Solidity directly.
Wow, it's quite beautiful. And then as we kind of like close this out of your stuff, I feel like your breakout moment was the Pepe. Was it a Pepe permanent? Like
permanent.
Permanent. Yeah, where this sold out, I feel like fairly quickly. You used Emblem Vault to kind of help distribute it that way, yeah. and then I know the dispenser filled up. Take us through the meaning of this piece and how you felt about its sellout.
Yeah, so I actually done the piece in November, and it was again SVG and a lot of research, how to do it on Bitcoin and so on, how to apply to fake rares, so a lot of stuff like that. And finally, when I've done it, I've I essentially did it. I have an article that explains the process. I'm not going to go into details now, but I basically stored it on Bitcoin itself, and then I applied fake rares, and it was accepted. Like my submission was accepted in January. And this is when basically I announced, okay, like, we're doing this, I'm selling it. And yeah, it became super popular. I think it sold out like within 5 hours or something. And now it's trading at 6x the price that I sold it for. And I think you bought one as well, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep. I think I was the first one I was the first one to buy the Emblem Vault one.
Yeah, exactly. And this was crazy actually. In the early on, I would put some like on Emblem Vault, like, I would put like one piece and you got that one. And then I put like 3 more. It got sold immediately as well. I put like 5 and it got sold immediately, while on Dispenser, it was sitting there. Like it was going maybe 1 in 1 hour, 2 in 1 hour. Like it was very slow on Dispenser. Or Emblem Vault was going like hotcakes, like immediately. It would go immediately. But then what happened in Dispenser, I think one user bought all of the remaining ones like in one transaction. Like he bought basically 14 was remaining, I think, and he bought all of them basically directly on so you can see in the dispenses that happened in the past. So yeah, whichever was, I think this big one, the
10 one.
16, 10, yeah. And then he bought the other 4 as well. So it's the same, I think, yeah. So that was like the crazy one, I think. And then he wrote me, actually, the person, he wrote me on Twitter later on, oh, I hope you don't mind that I bought all of them. I'm like, yeah, no, it's fine. Like, you bought it. And it's like, yeah, I see this like as an iconic moment in Bitcoin's like or fake rare history. Hopefully it is. Like, I don't think there was any Pepe on Bitcoin stored on Bitcoin that was, in the past. So I hope that was interesting. But from a perspective of actual storing, of course, there is like other like Olga that was stored on chain on Bitcoin as well. And now we have inscriptions.
Yep, we got Pepe fully on chain now. So you actually beat the wave by by about like 2 weeks or something like that. A few weeks, 2 months, 2 months. Yeah. Truly somebody who's able to see everything ahead of its time. What's your outlook, just real quick, of 2023? What are you looking most forward to from a personal perspective? Maybe from innovation, market, could be anything. Kind of what's your outlook and what are you looking for?
Oh, the thing I'm looking forward the most, I think there will be a lot more, at least that's my hope. Maybe it's a bit of a hopium actually. A lot more interoperability and composability. So I'm seeing, I'm following those on-chain chats a lot, right? Particularly in like Terraforms, there are some communities that are really like, really big brains, let's say. Like those people are actually writing the new ERC standards essentially, or NFT in ERC standards. The conversation, the way that the conversations are going there, it feels like there will be a lot of art experimentation first on those interoperability and composability side of it, and then I'm hoping that games will start adopt that as well. So it will, for sure, it will start with art. Like already there is a collection that's going to launch, I think, in a few weeks, that's going to kind of utilize one of those big advancements. There is a new contract called like Scripty Soul that's going to be, I think, quite big. At least from a technical perspective, I think it's quite big. I don't think like you can't really degen on a contract, but it's just like it's a cool way to for example, you can build your art, like generative art of 500 collections with whatever squares, shapes, colors, whatever. And then you can actually build another contract where that utilizes those shapes and colors and maybe add a distortion effect or some other effect on it. And then someone else can use the second contract to build on it and add a lightning effect. And you can actually start to have those really evolving collections, right? Like it will become a very, I think, interesting space for NFT art. And that's like, this is the thing that I'm fascinated by the most in NFT art, by the way. Like there are a lot of course, cool art NFTs, but the ones that I am personally more fascinated by are those that are blockchain native ones, like the things that can be only done using blockchain. And it's not just the storage of on-chain, but the mechanics of the chain, right? Like the ability to use these composability elements, the burn mechanics, the transferability, all these like elements, or collaboration, right? Like people can do things at the same time and so on. All these mechanics being used really fascinates me. Like to me, this is like the most interesting part of it, because when you have these done by the art world or art NFTs, I think it opens the door for other use cases a lot as well. You'll start seeing, the games, like, for example, like even from a game I didn't even mention before, but, when you have a game whose mechanics are mostly on chain, other person can come and build another game on top of it. Like the Banklinks article I'm talking about was talking about this case where, let's say you have a chess, right? You have a chess game and you write the rules of that on a smart contract. That makes sense, right? You can do that. And then maybe someone else comes and says that, oh, I just created chess v2, and the goal of this game is to have the king reach to the other side of the board. That's the main goal, not losing or winning the king, but the goal is really to reach there. That's the goal. So there can be new games built on top of those games using those smart contracts as well. And you can add more of these, of course. You can add, oh, I have a chess game that has a new player or new character called, I don't know, Trebuchet, like it can be like, you can do really interesting stuff, I think, with that. And I think people, especially the gaming world, might enjoy that a lot. Like it can get really interesting, I think.
Yeah, collaborate. Go ahead.
Yeah. Collaborate. So the other thing I was going to say was that the ZK take is what I'm really interested in, and I think I think it will be quite big, but that's probably maybe a bit longer term.
Oh man, I feel like ever since I got into crypto in 2016, the idea of ZKs has been been an ongoing development. Hopefully one day it'll come. It was kind of like ETH 2, where it'd been going on literally since its inception. So yeah, a lot of cool, fun stuff. I'm big on this idea of like collaborative NFTs. So I think I started seeing a lot of others start coalescing on this idea and different patterns. So I think that might be something here for the future. But yeah, Chainleft, this conversation was awesome. I actually learned a ton and actually got to learn more about your perspective, which isn't just in Twitter Spaces. So I appreciate you for sharing your time with us, and look forward to seeing some more Art Ponzi and some other various works that you put out. I think you have a pretty successful career on the horizon.
Thanks, Jake. It was great. Thank you for having me, and it was great talking to you. I'm also looking forward to more of your podcasts. I actually still haven't listened to the SOG Artist one that I'm really interested in listening to. But also, also good luck with the work with Emblem Vault as well. You guys are doing really great work. So yeah, looking forward to the created collections.
Thanks. Yeah, me too, man. Development, as I've learned as being at Emblem Vault over the last 3 months, man, takes a lot longer than you'd ever expect.
That's normal though. Yeah,
things are complicated, but yeah, thank you, Chainleft, and thank you guys for listening and watching. We'll catch you next time.